With another Bitcoin bull run imminent, unfortunately, the grifters are coming back out of the woodwork, and they're essentially trying to confuse noobs all over again for a battle that has already been fought and won. Let's talk about the block size war and why BCH is not Bitcoin. Welcome back, everyone. I honestly thought that this was over. I thought that it was understood that Bitcoin won the block size wars and BCH, right, is not Bitcoin. But unfortunately, there's people who want to pretend that history isn't what happened. Okay, people want to pretend for whatever reason that somehow Roger Ver was really a victim of the big bad Bitcoin core machine. Well, guys, I'm here to give everybody a little reminder of what actually happened back in 2017. And this person that's going around right now parading themselves as a victim was actually the aggressor. Anyways, let's dive into it. And of course, guys, all the links that I use are going to be in the show notes, so you can go back and check everything that I'm referencing. So let's dive into it. What was the block size war? The scaling debate, described as Bitcoin's first major civil war, divided the crypto community, it's more like Bitcoin community, and had significant implications for the future of the currency. Two camps developed: big blockers, who wanted to increase block size for cheaper and faster transactions, and small blockers, who wanted the 1 megabyte limit to remain permanent to prioritize Bitcoin's integrity and security, and also maintain sufficient decentralization and ensure that it is not so easy to co-opt and centralize. When Bitcoin was launched, the currency had virtually no value. It actually had no value when it launched. Anyways, and only a small contingency of people was mining for new coins. Further, each individual Bitcoin transaction was relatively small from a data standpoint, so the size limit did not originally affect the network. While Satoshi never indicated why the limit was put in place, it is speculated that it was to keep the blockchain small and discourage large amounts of spam transactions. The 1 megabyte limit became problematic as the currency grew in popularity. Limiting the size of Bitcoin blocks meant that there was a limit on the number of transactions that could be confirmed on the network. Even today, the Bitcoin blockchain itself can only process 7 transactions per second versus about 29 on Ethereum and 1700 on Visa. And of course, this is a misrepresentation, okay? Bitcoin is a base layer. It offers the most secure transaction finality. Comparing it to a third and or fifth layer monetary network layer such as Visa, which doesn't provide any transaction finality. Okay, and the transaction finality that you can claim that it offers really only takes place 3 to 5 business days after, and it doesn't actually settle on the Visa network. So anyways, it doesn't even matter. But again, this disingenuous framing was one of the ways that these people, right, the people that were the proponents of big blocks, thought that they could somehow co-opt unsuspecting noobs in supporting their fork of Bitcoin. Just to give some perspective on the block size war, this was a podcast where Tim Ferriss interviewed Nick Szabo, and they talk specifically about the block size issue. I'm just going to play this minute excerpt, and then we're going to go back to the article.
Nick, what are the biggest misconceptions or common misunderstandings related to cryptocurrency or Bitcoin? Or like, what do smart people get wrong? If there's anything where you're like, God, this like X drives me nuts. If I hear one more person who should know better.
Well, we could get into the whole block size issue because there's this parameter. We shouldn't, but I probably will talk about it a little bit. There's this. It's a technical security parameter. It's called the block size. How the general public glommed onto this, I do not know. But there's an obsessive group of people who think of this as some kind of artificial barrier to more transactions per second on Bitcoin. really its job is it's a fence preventing people from overwhelming, flooding the network with lots of transactions that the full nodes I talked about can't handle. That transaction history keeps building and building.
Yeah, at a very simple level, if every computer is storing a copy of every transaction, and so what you do is if you keep increasing the number of transactions too quickly, then you only allow a smaller and smaller shrinking set of computers to run the code.
What that means is that if we actually followed what the big blockers wanted, Bitcoin would be entirely co-opted by the 58 companies who signed the New York Agreement, which we're going to get into. Anyways, back to our article. By 2015, two camps emerged regarding the 1 megabyte limit, one who believed in the small block size and one who thought that the limit was too small. Bitcoin blocks filled up quickly, making transactions slower and more expensive. That actually is also not true. I'm not talking about the more expensive part. Yes, indeed, paying for the block space, yeah, it got more expensive, but slower? No, because if you needed to have a transaction in the next block, you'd pay the fee. Big blockers versus small blockers. So the big blockers wanted to modify the original Bitcoin protocol to increase block capacity and process more transactions. They believed cheaper, faster transactions would make Bitcoin more scalable and therefore more accessible. While increasing the block size may not be a permanent solution, some suggested it would help keep transactions cheap in the short term and allow more time for scaling solutions to potentially develop. This would allow Bitcoin to compete on the global stage as an alternative payment system to companies like Visa or PayPal. Bitcoin is not trying to compete with a payment system. That is not Bitcoin's entire purpose. And see, this is the problem with the big blockers. For them, this is all they see. Okay? They don't give a shit about storing your value into the future, which is kind of weird, right? Because so many of these big blockers are proponents of freedom. Wouldn't you want to have the freedom to store your value into the future so that you don't have to become a slave in the future because your value has been sucked away? Anyways, all right, let's continue. So small blockers fought to keep the 1 megabyte size limit in place to prioritize Bitcoin's fundamental principles of security and decentralization. Small blockers believe that if the block size increased, it would become too expensive for individual users to run a Bitcoin node. This would lead to companies hosting nodes in data centers, which could compromise decentralization of the network. They believed in system resilience and taking a long-term approach to increasing Bitcoin's market share. Sergio Lerner, a cryptocurrency researcher, summarized the nuances of the debate in an email to a Bitcoin listserv. There are two groups of people which have two different visions of Bitcoin. None of these visions are wrong. One group values things like decentralization, lack of government, censorship resistance, anonymity. This group thinks that Bitcoin will transform our world in 20 to 30 years. To reach this goal, it is of other importance to stick to those values. There is no rush. The other group values things like reaching 1 billion users in the next 5 years or serving real unbanked users today, even if that requires a political agreement now. Both visions have their merits, but they are incompatible. Bitcoin XT. Bitcoin XT was the first solution introduced by the big blockers. It proposed raising the block limit from 1 to 8 megs and then doubling it every 2 years until it reached a maximum size of 8 gigs in 2036. The changes were incompatible with existing Bitcoin nodes, so the solution would require a hard fork. Bitcoin XT was proposed by Mike Hearn, who later rage quit, a respected Bitcoin developer, and supported by Gavin Andreessen, whom Satoshi had designated as the leader of the Bitcoin project after he stepped down. It's a bit of a gray area on that one. Anyways, the solution was highly controversial for the small blockers who viewed the hard fork as too extreme. They feared that Bitcoin would split into two coins, people would lose the coins they already had, or it would change the network in other fundamental ways. Further, after a letter of support for Bitcoin XT was signed by several companies. Wait a second. I thought Roger was the victim here. It was poor little Roger just trying for the little guy. But let's look at some of these companies. Several companies such as BitPay. Oh, that's not a little company. Circle. Blockchain.info. Wow, the big blockers camp was seen as aligning with big businesses. Huh. I thought Roger was a victim. I don't get it. That's what everybody's painting today. Roger the victim. But it looks like he had all the corporate backing back then. Something doesn't add up, almost like we're being lied to today. Developer Peter Will put forward a solution called SegWit, short for segregated witness. It was a new transaction format where the signature or witness, one of the largest data components of a Bitcoin transaction, was removed from the input field of the block, resulting in more space. Wow. So that didn't involve a hard fork, and it didn't mean taking away sufficient decentralization to serve the interests of a few corporations? That's an enemy for sure. That's an enemy of Bitcoin right there. SegWit changed the way block size was calculated, which would effectively result in a small block size increase to approximately 2 megabytes, a notion that was still supported by most of the community as well as embraced by small blockers. It would be implemented with a soft fork, meaning that the upgrade was compatible with existing nodes. Bitcoin Classic. Bitcoin Classic was a proposal from the big blockers with Gavin Andreessen as lead developer. It was another attempt to raise the block limit to 2 megabytes through a hard fork this time. Bitcoin Classic gained widespread support from companies. That's right, once again, companies, okay, such as Coinbase and various mining pools, and was viewed as a more moderate attempt to increase block size than the jump to 8 megabytes by Bitcoin XT. Okay, so you can see you've got two separate camps here, but they're both, you'll notice this, both of these camps are petitioning for hard forks, okay? Both of these camps are petitioning to co-opt the network for their own gain. May 22, 2017, let's enter the New York Agreement. This is the combination of these supposed victims of Bitcoin. Leaders from 58 crypto companies, victims of Bitcoin. That's right, 58 crypto companies and some miners had a closed-door meeting. Wow. Where they created a two-phase solution, activate SegWit, then double the block limit compared to the original SegWit proposal. They believed it would resolve the conflict by combining both a soft fork and a hard fork, giving each camp a part of the solution they had been working towards. Many of the crypto community saw the agreement as a corporate takeover of the Bitcoin network. They were angered that there was no mention that Bitcoin users are the ones who control the protocol, and that support from users was necessarily before enacting changes. The small blockers voiced especially strong objections to the agreement, noting that they did not feel represented, and they were not. Okay? They were not represented. It was all these clout-chasing circle jerkers that were out there shoving this big blocker fucking narrative down everyone's throat. Okay? That's all it was. People were not there back then. So today, Roger paints this fucking picture of him being this victim, and he's not. Okay? Him and all of these people were the aggressors trying to co-opt the network. After months of contentious debate, the proposal was suspended in November 2017. The second phase of the agreement, raising the block size through a hard fork, was abandoned completely. So there's a Medium article that was released by Digital Currency Group, who, by the way, was one of the proponents of big blocks, right? They were part of the support. So they detailed the entire proposal. I'm just going to read this very small portion of it because it's just to give you a reference, okay? Because again, right now, these big block idiots are trying to paint Bitcoin Core as this big evil monster, not being genuine, okay? They are not being genuine. So here we go. We welcome all companies, miners, developers, and users to join us and help prepare Bitcoin for the future. The group of signed companies represents a critical mass of the Bitcoin ecosystem. As of May 25th, this group represents 58 companies located in 22 countries, 83% of the hash power, $5.1 billion USD monthly on-chain transaction volumes, and 20.5 million Bitcoin wallets. Now, if this isn't somebody trying to sell you on how big and powerful they are, I don't fucking understand what is. Now, let's go take a look at some of the companies that supported this crap, right? You'd probably want to know who was supporting this. Bitfury, Bitmain, BitPay, right? We all know who BitPay is. Circle, Civic. For the people who don't know who Civic is, just go look up Vinny Lingham, right? He was one of the original. I shouldn't say original. He's one of the older crypto grifters who was grifting people on this bullshit product called Civic, which I have debunked multiple times because I used to work with it. So I know for a fact that the token had absolutely no fucking use case except to steal money. Get money from unsuspecting noobs funding a new technology. Bullshit. Total fucking bullshit. Nobody even uses their stupid ID product. Anyways, Coinbase also, right? Another champion of Bitcoin. Every chance they get, they don't do anything for Bitcoin. Okay? And now, of course, somebody will be like, well, what are you talking about? They just got ClearSpark or whatever to implement Lightning. Coinbase has fucking devs, okay? And they just hired some third-party company to implement Lightning. That is some fucking bullshit, okay? Straight up. Too little, too late. Brian Armstrong and his .eth directors, you're not fooling anybody. Anyways, F2 Pool, Genesis Global Trading, Grayscale Investments. That's right, Barry. Another big week for Barry. Yep, another enemy of fucking Bitcoin. There you go. Shapeshift. There you go. Vaultoro. Oh, Vaultoro. Not too many people know Vaultoro, but Vaultoro used to sponsor a Bitcoin-only podcast. Well, supposedly, right? A Bitcoin-only podcaster. And yet there they were, ready to sign the agreement to destroy and dismantle Bitcoin for everyone in order to make it a walled garden for a very small group of people to control. Now, we have the background on that. Let's continue. Bitcoin Cash. The big blockers were displeased with the results of the New York agreement and how, and still wanted a larger block size increase. A group of miners and developers split off to introduce a hard fork of Bitcoin in July 2017, originally called Bitcoin ABC and eventually renamed to Bcash. Bitcoin Cash, or Bcash, had a block size of 8 megabytes that increased over time, resulting in higher throughput and lower fees. So I just want everybody to pay attention here. They got their fork. Now, supposedly, the evil Bitcoiners, okay, somehow were repressing this and suppressing this. Let's go take a look at the truth for a second. This is a website called howmanyconfs.com, right? How many confirmations are equivalent to Bitcoin's confirmation? So here are Bitcoin's 6 confirmations, okay? And here's Bitcoin Cash's, okay? Look at this. To equal 6 confirmations on the Bitcoin network, you need 1,299 confirmations to equal the security of 6 confirmations on this decentralized co-opted network, so to speak, okay? Not only that, it's 231 times slower because it requires that much more. And of course, you may say, well, Phil, that's not an argument against Bitcoin Cash. No, it's not. But what it shows you is it lost the fucking war fair and square. And again, we are going to show, I always have to show this hash rate chart, but it's just pathetic that people sit there and think it doesn't matter. Look, this is Bitcoin and this is Bitcoin Cash. Okay, this is Bitcoin Cash all the way down here at the bottom, completely flat. They lost. The market has spoken, and this garbage shit fork is only used to fleece noobs. That's all it's used for. It's just fleecing noobs. Roger Ver, an early Bitcoin enthusiast and owner of Bitcoin.com, signaled his support to shift all company resources to Bitcoin Cash, helping the new currency to gain traction. The big blockers celebrated a victory in launching their new coin with a higher block limit. And again, the market has spoken. Nobody cares. Okay? Nobody cares about your co-opted shit chain. UASF, the small blockers camp, while smaller and much less funded. Well, wait a second, though. Smaller and much less funded? I thought Roger was the poor victim here. The small blockers camp, while smaller and much less funded than the big blockers, which is really strange because the BSV and BCH components, they love to paint the picture that Bitcoin is this big bad wolf and they're fighting the system, but it's total fucking bullshit. Okay, it's total bullshit. Anyways. So yeah. the small blockers had become an increasingly vocal and persuasive group. They were still garnering support for SegWit, bolstered by the anti-establishment views that swept through the community after the New York Agreement. However, SegWit had nowhere near the 95% support it needed from miners to activate. A developer using the pseudonym Shaolin Fry introduced a new strategy called user-activated soft fork. Traditionally, soft forks were triggered by miners, which gave them control and power over the network. Shaolin Fry's proposal, named BIP 148, let users running a node signal their support for SegWit ahead of an activation date, and to not accept non-SegWit blocks from miners. If enough nodes signaled their support for SegWit, then the miners would have to accept the upgrade by the activation date, or else their blocks would be rejected. The risky idea paid off when SegWit was activated on the Bitcoin network in July 2017, with the largest miner, Bitmain, flagging its support and other miners following to implement the upgrade. SegWit also laid the foundation for the Lightning Network, a protocol built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain that enables off-chain transactions. Now, something that the big blockers always like to, I shouldn't even call them big blockers, just BCH and BSV idiots. Something that they always like to say is that Blockstream co-opted Bitcoin. This was just a random pleb, Shaolin Fry. Okay, and as you'll notice, the Lightning Network, not Blockstream at all. So again, their narratives, when you really examine them, they're completely full of shit. The end of the war. With the dissolution of the second part of the New York Agreement, the creation of Bitcoin Cash, and the adoption of SegWit, it's generally agreed that the small blockers came out on the winning side of the block size war. The UASF raised the block limit without using a hard fork. Oh, look at that. Look at that. We didn't have to give... Wait a second, we didn't have to give power or control over to a subset of companies that wanted to rule over us? And we got to keep Bitcoin? That's terrible. Wow. We should have really prioritized those super fast, cheap payments so that everybody could be buying fucking coffee. The UASF raised the block limit without using the hard fork. Further, the change was implemented through ordinary users, not by miners or corporations. Sounds like Bitcoin ethos to me. An event that was seen as encompassing the original spirit of Bitcoin. In his book, The Blocksize War, which I suggest everybody actually reads instead of wasting their time trying to platform scammers and grifters like Roger Ver for fucking clout, okay? In his book, The Blocksize War, an author, Jonathan Bayers, speculates, in essence, this story is about how the small blockers had constructed a more compelling and attractive narrative than the large blockers. A new form of money where the users set the rules, simply made for a better story than a high-capacity, low-fee global payment system, irrespective of the truth of either claim. Money is ultimately a collective confidence game. The small blockers proved themselves to be quite effective players of the game, and for this they were rewarded with their victory. Here's a tweet from Roger Ver, right? And he goes, I called Adam back an intellectual coward. Then he blocked me to prove me right. Okay? And that's because he's shilling his new book, okay? And he's doing everything he can to garner attention. And I understand, right? Somebody will be like, well, then why did you make this clip and expose his work and da-da-da? Someone's going to find it. Yeah, I get that, guys. Double-edged sword, okay? If we don't say anything, all there is his narrative. All there is his version of a bastardized truth. That's all there is. So no, we will not let that happen. And we will definitely be creating content to show time and time again that the BCH and BSV proponents were and are the bad actors attempting to co-opt Bitcoin. Don't fall for this bullshit. Don't fall for these narratives. BCH and BSV are not Bitcoin. Catch you guys all tomorrow.